Hello, Internet. Gino, that Pinguino Greco here again with another episode of Deep Listens, and it's time for a spooky episode.
Ooh.
Which means that I am joined by Peter, the spooky Busby. Ooh.
I've always been told I was the spookiest of all the Busbys, and we have many spooky people in our family. What's going on, everybody? We're playing Dead Space in honor of our Halloween episode. It was my pick this week, and I'm pumped to talk about it. I have a similarly spooky and Dead Space relevant animal fact to share. So this one, it might be common knowledge. I knew about it before, but I'm not sure everybody does. So there's this story in the BBC. I'll just read the title, and it sort of gives away the whole thing. The chicken that lived for 18 months without a head.
What?
Yeah. So this farmer, Lloyd Olson, back in 1945, was killing chickens as one does on a farm. And they cut off its head, and the chicken continued to live for 18 months without a head.
What did it do?
So, apparently a chicken's brain is mostly at the back of its head. So they cut it, far enough forward that there was, sufficient brain left, I guess. They would feed it a liquid diet, and when its, throat got clogged, they would clear it with a syringe. But one time they forgot the syringe, and the chicken ended up choking to death. After 18 months without a head.
That's amazing that it ended up dying from choking and not from being headless.
Right? You'd think that would have been the cause of death, but no.
What a way to go after you've been decapitated.
Right? That's what you lived through, and then you're I choked on some corn.
That just sounds like in Futurama when everyone gets when the brains come and steal everyone's intelligence. And at one point, I think it's Hermes is in the shower. Or it's raining outside, and he's
in the shower, and Fry's to close his mouth.
Yeah, he closes his mouth because he'll drown himself. I would imagine if you're a headless chicken and you've just got a hole, rain is rough.
That's a good point. The article, at least the BBC one, didn't mention rain. It did mention that a whole bunch of other farmers tried to create their own headless chickens, though.
It's like he inspired a bunch of horrifying Frankenstein monsters.
Right.
Nope, he was the lucky one with the headless chicken.
Somehow things just came together for this guy.
Well, listeners, if you're wondering where Billy is, he's got the spookiest of illnesses. The spookiest of illnesses, the flu.
Ooh.
So he couldn't be with us this week. He is recovering. However, we go on in his stead, and we also have a small announcement up front. I'll make it this week. Next week will be Billy's last regular show, because he is going to be, unfortunately, preoccupied with other life commitments.
Yep. Bettering himself as an individual.
Growing. We're very excited. Maybe he will talk about it on the next show. No clue. But next week will be his last show, and so I will announce at the front of the show what we'll be playing, as opposed to the end, because I want everyone to know, and if they want to get in any Billy-specific emails, they should do so. So we're going to be playing Ocarina of Time.
Mm-hmm.
Billy's favorite game.
An okay game. It's fine.
People like it.
Yeah.
It'll be the first time I play it.
Mm-hmm.
I have tried to play it before, but it's a long game. So I will be playing it for the first time, and Billy will be guiding us through one of his favorite games ever. So we do have a new host, but we will introduce them after Billy's send-off show.
Sounds good.
So just go ahead if you want to get in emails. We don't have any emails for this week, but if you want to get in emails or say any send any well wishes to Billy, you can do so at DeepListensPod on Twitter, deeplistens.libsyn.com. We've got our comment section, and deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com. That's the preferred way to get comments in. So go ahead, send it in. We will miss Billy. He will still be editing the show, but alas, playing a game every 2 weeks and also doing off-week stuff occasionally will be too much.
I'm sure he will make guest appearances from time to time, though.
Yes, we will need him at least for this game of the year.
Yes.
Because he was on the show for all but 2 episodes this year.
Yes.
So, without further ado, it's time to discuss Dead Space by Visceral Games. It came out in 2008, and it makes me feel old.
Yeah, it just had its 10th anniversary. I want to say October 22nd?
October 14th.
14th, okay.
Fuck.
I know.
Man,
we're old.
I played this game when it first came out. I just remember one time I was talking to a professor of mine in college, and we were talking about how the Minnesota Vikings dome had had caved in.
Oh, right, when it had
The
too
old
much
dome.
snow on top
It
of
had
it?
too much snow on top. And he said,
Right.
yeah, well, that happens occasionally. That happened a few years ago. I'm like, yeah, it happened 20 years ago. And he was like, no, it happened in like 93. Or like 95 or something. I'm like, yeah, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And he's like, get out. Get out of my
I hate you.
Get out of my office hours. And you made me do that. When you said, let's play a 10-year-old game, I'm like, oh, good, we're going to play like Silent Hill 2 or something, a real classic. And it was like Dead Space.
Dead Space.
Fuck. Well, what is Dead Space, Pete?
Oh, man, this is a tough one. I guess, yeah, I have to summarize now. So Dead Space, it's ostensibly a survival horror game. So you play as Isaac Clarke, an engineer, who's dispatched to what's called a planet cracking ship. So it's basically a huge mining operation that just takes down entire planets. But this one has run into some trouble. We're not really sure of what variety, but they need to send Isaac and a team in there to repair things. And he's going, one, because it's his job, but two, his girlfriend Nicole is also on board. So your mission basically is to go in, repair the ship, and hopefully find Nicole. But things go awry very quickly. And I guess I can just tell them how it goes awry now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So what happens is there's this virus on board that turns everybody into necromorphs. So when people die, they get infected, and it's basically like a zombie situation, but instead of your standard zombie, they're horrible Cronenbergian monsters.
Yes.
So Isaac has to avoid these things as he tries to fix the ship.
Yep. So you are avoiding Cronenbergs and trying to very quickly go to all these different parts of the ship, just following basically fetch quest or, go to X, press X game design.
Yep. You can think of it it's sort of like BioShock. Like one of your teammates is in another area feeding you instructions that you then follow.
Exactly. So it's important to mention Isaac is a silent protagonist. He has almost no personality to him. He's in basically, it almost looks like a Big Daddy suit. You've got
they're fairly similar.
This outfit with this mask on it, and Isaac basically has no personality to him at all.
No, he does have a face, though.
He does. You can see his face at like the beginning of the game, and I think at the end of the game, but not, and like barely.
Yeah.
But he's basically just there to be the vessel of the player. And there are two other characters that you kind of interact with. Hammond, who is Zach Hammond, your kind of stereotypical lead. He's the captain of the ship, the repair ship, and he knows too much. Or, you don't trust him because the ship is fucked, and when you get there, he is not as freaked out as everyone else.
Yeah, he's not particularly surprised.
Yes, and he's also pretty, useless.
Yeah.
He just gives you advice and doesn't seem to help very much, even though he's a security officer. And then there's Kendra Daniels, who's a technologist, who is the other person who survives your initial crash.
Is that her actual title in the game? It's just technologist?
Yes.
Okay.
She's the owner of one of the most ridiculous outfits I've seen. It doesn't at first look ridiculous what her outfit is, but until you think about the mechanics of it.
I mean, you're in space.
No, her shirt. I don't know if you've looked at what her shirt looks like.
I'm not sure. Let me take a look. Refresh my memory.
But it is very, very. It looks like just a normal it's like a blouse sort of deal, but it's somehow skin tight.
Why is it painted on?
Yeah. Despite there being openings.
There's a stripe down the middle.
Yeah, there's a stripe down the middle. It looks like it's like a two-piece thing. She's got an undershirt and an overshirt.
Unzipped and yet still skin tight.
Yeah, it's incredible. And it hugs the underboob as well. So it doesn't drape at any point.
I'm very confused by this shirt.
Yeah, that's what I mean. At first you think, oh, that's just a normal space shirt. And it's not like there are other characters who don't, no one has a shirt that has a little give in it. Isaac's shirt has a little bit of ruffles. Hammond shirts do. But Kendra's, in true 2008 fashion, is somehow skin tight despite being a two-piece. And the only two-piece.
Right. Now, obviously, as a male gamer, I'm titillated and enthralled by this shirt. But I'm equally confused by it.
Yep. It is a magical outfit. So she basically is the other character. She's a little bit more, I guess.
She's your
on
voice
Isaac's
in the
level.
sky. She's giving you the instructions.
Well, her and Hammond kind of go back and forth.
Oh, yeah.
But Hammond is kind of this authoritative character who he's the senior security officer. He seems to be like the captain of the ship, whereas Kendra is kind of your equal, and she's kind of confiding in you a little bit more, whereas Hammond's just kind of giving you orders. But practically all they do is pop in your head occasionally and give you instructions, and you barely interact with them at all. Anytime you're in the room with them, they don't do anything. Most of the time they're behind a piece of glass, and you have to watch them talk. So for all intents and purposes, it's basically you, a bunch of enemies, and then some, Bioshock-esque audio logs.
And every once in a while you run into somebody else on the ship, ostensibly just to watch them kill themselves. Like, it happens a lot.
Either just to watch them kill themselves or watch them, creepily stand there and then, walk away, or they are still somewhat sane and they are malevolent. But it's not very much. So I think that one of the big drawing points for Dead Space is the dismemberment system, which is a crazy thing to say.
That's why I play the game, really, to hack off limbs.
Yeah. So in this game, the central conceit is the Cronenberg necromorph monsters have these giant emaciated claws and legs, and shooting them in the body doesn't do anything because they're zombies.
No, nor does the head. This isn't a headshot situation.
Well, you can shoot their heads off, but shooting the head off doesn't actually help you that much. They are more vulnerable in the limbs, and it's twofold. One, it does more damage if you shoot them in the limbs, and two, when you shoot them in the limbs, you can slice the limbs off, which then causes them to crawl or lose whatever function that limb had. Yeah. So most enemies, most of the basic necromorphs, have these little, regular legs, little T-Rex arms, but then giant prehensile claws that come out of the top.
Like killer praying mantises.
Yes, that is the correct analogy. And I found, I don't know about you, my move was always shoot them in the legs and then shoot off their top tentacles.
Yep, to buy yourself the time. Yep,
because once you shoot their legs off, they move much slower, and once you shoot their tentacle off, they can't move anymore. They usually die. That usually kills them. And then on top of that, you've got other variations of necromorphs. So there's creepy babies. They are babies that have tentacles that come out of their top bits. They don't really explain why there's just a vat full of babies in this ship.
Right, I'm not sure how long these planet cracking operations go. I imagine long, but I don't imagine long enough that they need to replenish their labor force with, space babies.
Yeah, and I need to emphasize, when you encounter the baby enemies, there are literal vats of babies in suspended animation just kind of floating. Yep. And that's where these baby monsters have come from. But, if it comes to that, right, you're going to be here for a while, why don't you just send enough people that they can fuck and make more?
Yeah, the old-fashioned way.
The old-fashioned way. I guess it's inefficient. I wonder if this is like some sort of capitalist society where these people are there from the day they're born to the day they die, and any time spent fucking or doing other things is just, they cannot be tolerated. And so they send a jar full of space babies.
I guess if, planet cracking, the literal opening of a planet to siphon all of its resources, didn't send enough of I don't know about this corporation sort of vibe, vats of babies really just drive the point home.
Yeah, but the baby monsters, they can climb on walls, and they're really crafty and zero gravity, which is annoying, and they shoot spines at you, but when they're going to shoot spines at you, they expose 3 tentacles that you can shoot. There are these I think they're called rippers. They're these weird, creatures that have a kind of human front half and then a scorpion tail.
Leapers.
I hate those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They jump, as their name implies, they jump around.
And they also are frequently found in zero gravity, which is annoying.
There's a pregnant enemy.
Yeah.
That, according to the Wikipedia page, is just literally called a pregnant.
Yeah, that one sucks. It's just like a regular enemy, but it's got a big tummy, and if you shoot it in the tummy, a bunch of little, like, parasite-looking things spill out. Think like the Flood in Halo. A bunch of those spill out, and then they jump on you. And that's probably the easiest way to die in this game from an enemy, is those things just getting near you, because they deal a ton of damage really quickly. Any other enemies? There's, like, super versions of the basic enemies. And then there's these weird, like, critters that grab corpses and inject them full of plague juice and turn them into super enemies. And they will basically just melee attack you.
There are also a few, they're basically proximity mines when you think about it. They're big tentacles that exist on certain areas that if you walk past them, they pretty much just kill you in one shot.
Yeah, and there's some dudes that are kind of in the wall, embedded in the wall.
The Guardians.
Yeah, and they have a bunch of tentacles that you need to shoot off, and if you don't, as you're shooting them, they will birth little blobs of goo that have a single tentacle and attack you, and will explode if they get near you, which is annoying.
I actually did like the Guardians, not from a combat perspective, but one interesting thing as you move throughout the ship is you can see people in various stages of transforming into Guardians. So, like, at a certain point, you see people attached to the wall who are basically still conscious, and they tell you how terrible it is to be turned into a Guardian, which, understandable.
Do they actually talk?
Yeah, like, I think one set of them does early on. And then after that, you see them in various stages of decomp. They might not talk, they might just scream. I kind of forget now.
Oh, because if a wall person talked to me, I would have noted that down, because this game has almost nothing going on story-wise.
Yeah.
So just having that would have been enough.
It might have just been screams, but you can see them in sort of various stages of change, which is always interesting just because, you never see, like, a Goomba, like, slowly transforming into a Goomba or something in Mario.
Fuck. Where do Goombas come from? That's a great point.
Yeah, I have no idea. Are they animals or plants? Or fungi, I guess.
I don't know. Do Goombas reproduce asexually?
I hope not, because they are hot.
Great point. They do stack. We do know this.
That's
they stack,
true.
And there are a lot of them when they
That
stack.
could be sexual.
Well, we'll have to get to the bottom of this another day.
We'll make this a whole nother
They are very
podcast.
phallic. We can agree on this.
That's true.
So I do like the kind of atmospheric storytelling occasionally, like the enemies embedded in the walls, or the sections where the ship is just full of this organic matter that clearly used to be people.
I think the corruption is what they call it. This, like Halo, this game loves stupid proper nouns.
Yes. But this game also has that BioShock disorder where everyone in their last dying moments smears their blood on the wall to tell you some very important fact. And the most egregious example of this, I think, is the first example, when you get the plasma cutter. So one of the main conceits of this game is you're not using regular guns for the most part, because regular weapons are intended to be shot at living things, whereas mining equipment, which this ship is full of, is good at taking down these enemies because you have to shoot their limbs off. So things that cut are actually much more effective against them than conventional weaponry. Mm-hmm. So you get a plasma cutter, which is meant for, I assume, cutting things of some, space cutting.
Rocks,
it's unclear what this is meant to cut, but it's basically a gun that will either shoot a vertical line or a horizontal line, and it can switch between the two. And when you first get it, the game tells you, shoot the limbs off. Like, there's a tutorial that tells you to shoot the limbs off. Then Hammond, comes on your radio and says, aim for the limbs. And someone else says, aim for the limbs. And then when you find the plasma cutter, scrawled in blood behind it is, shoot the limbs. So they tell you, 4 times, don't shoot him in the face.
Right.
But I think that, the environmental... I know that this was because of BioShock and games like it, that scrawling stuff on the wall was just the way you did things. But I found most of the wall art to not be that compelling in this game.
Oh, no. And when we get to the story, we'll talk about some of the other egregious sort of BioShock inspirations. But, you can very clearly see the parallels here. But while we're on the subject of the plasma cutter, I would like to say I think this is probably the best default weapon I've ever used in a game. Like, I pretty much devoted all of my playthrough to using the plasma cutter. And it's a deceptively simple conceit, right? Like, it shoots vertical for its primary and then horizontal for its secondary. And you can just sort of see these lines drawn out across the necromorphs. It's incredibly satisfying to like line up the geometry properly. And it's a weapon that, if you continue to upgrade it, stays effective throughout the whole game.
Yes, and it is, I think, the most effective just because it is capable. It's one of the most effective weapons because it is capable of dealing with enemies that have appendages in a vertical or horizontal orientation.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the other weapons only really work horizontal or vertical, and so that kind of limits what you're shooting at. You know, sometimes you're in zero gravity situations or you have things that are on walls, and in those cases, shooting horizontally is actually bad. You know, if something's on the wall kind of at 90 degrees to you, like one of those babies, and it shoots its tentacles out, a vertical line will take down one or two tentacles at a time, but a horizontal line won't even hit one. It might not even be able to have hit one. So it's one of the only weapons that just works on all enemy types equally well, and it's very accurate.
Mm-hmm.
I found that I liked the plasma rifle a lot because when you think about it, a single point is capable of cutting vertically or horizontally, and it can just dump. Like, it's got a ton of ammo.
Oh, yeah.
You can give it a ton of damage, and so it's really good at just crowd control. And if you're accurate with it, it can take down any limb because it's just shooting at a single point.
It's probably the best weapon at range, too, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, it's accurate at range, and the only problem with it is it just churns through ammo until you upgrade the damage. Mm-hmm. And this game has an inventory system, and that's a real... What did you think of the inventory system?
I mean, it didn't seem to limit in the way that, like, I don't think I've ever played the Resident Evil games, but it seems like they're notorious for sort of ammo shortages. So, like, this didn't seem that particularly finicky to me, but it wasn't a particularly satisfying inventory system, if that makes any sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I found it to just be a nuisance.
Yeah.
Like, I very rarely ran out of ammo, truly, but there were plenty of times where my choice was between having spare health, having schematics, because you find health, ammo, there's some items that are just to be sold, and you have recharges for, like, your stasis ability, which is an ability you can use to slow down an enemy or an object, which allows you to do crowd control. And you also have oxygen tanks, because sometimes you go into areas in a vacuum, and those oxygen tanks will help extend your life by a little bit. If you run out of oxygen, you die immediately. So all of those little things meant that if you wanted to plan for every eventuality, you basically couldn't, especially if you found schematics or sellable items. Because until you find a shop to drop those items off at, they're just occupying an entire slot in your inventory. And a slot in your inventory can mean one healing item, or for some pieces of ammo, like 50 pieces of ammo or 100 shots. Like, it can be a lot of shots that take up one slot in your inventory.
That's another reason to stick with the plasma cutter, too. Like, the fewer guns you carry, the more slots you open. And if this is going to be effective in pretty much all cases, you might as well run with it.
Exactly. And the game is smart about what it drops in terms of ammo. It will only drop ammo that you are capable of using. So if you do not diversify your ammo and you do not diversify your weapons, you will just always get ammo for your weapon. So it actually, in some ways, hurts you to diversify.
Yeah, it's odd to incentivize, like, not exploring the combat mechanics in that way.
Yeah,
like, I vaguely appreciate it because then I can, shoot stuff, but it also messes with the horror aspect of it.
Yeah, and one of the other things that I think really incentivizes you to focus on one or two weapons is the upgrade system. So you get these things called power nodes throughout the game. You can buy them at shops for 10,000 credits, or you can find them just kind of on walls or dropped from some especially tough enemies. And you use those at a workbench to upgrade your weapons. So you basically just get a a grid with different nodes in it, and you can just plug a power node in, and once you plug a node into a given spot, it will give you an upgrade, and it's kind of like a skill tree, basically.
Yeah.
You generally get 1 or 2 points of start on any given weapon, and then you'll sometimes have to burn power nodes just to get to other nodes, but generally you're just upgrading the damage, the capacity, the reload time on your guns.
You can also use the power nodes to access basically secret restock rooms.
Yeah, and those tend to just be full of ammo and like 1 or 2 healing items.
Yes.
I usually would use the power nodes that way because the amount of stuff you can find in those rooms is about 10,000 credits or more worth of stuff.
And occasionally you also just flat out get a power node.
Yeah, and on those cases, it just pays for itself.
Exactly.
So it's worth it to just always have at least 1 power node with you. But if you do focus on like 1 or 2 items, you can just plug all your power nodes into it, and then it will be fully upgraded early in the game, and then you just roll through everything. Because your gun is upgraded in a way that it ostensibly should not be, because they're expecting you to spend your credits on the new guns. I found, actually, the game is much, much, much easier if you only get... I ended up buying 4 guns, but I never bought another one.
Yeah, there's really no reason to.
Yeah, I got the Ripper, which is a super awesome chainsaw sort of thing. You basically put out a saw, and it will hover out in front of you on a straight line, and any enemies it comes into contact with, it will kind of, as the enemy gets closer to you, the blade will pull in closer. As they get farther, the blade will follow them farther.
Mm-hmm.
So that one's cool, and it's got, every weapon also has an alternate fire. The Ripper just shoots the saw blades, so it just becomes a regular gun if you want it to be. But the best use of the Ripper tends to be just like put the blade out, and then a single blade will stay out for a few seconds, and it does a good amount of damage. And then I also use the line rack, or the line gun? Line cannon?
Line gun. Is that the one that pegs people to the walls?
No. The line gun is basically like a giant plasma cutter.
Right.
It just shoots horizontally.
Yes.
And then it can also shoot mines. But the line gun, just anything, if you just aim it at the legs of a handful of enemies in a room, it will kind of chop them all down in one hit for the most part. And so it was kind of my heavy gun of choice.
Mm-hmm.
What about yourself?
So I had like I said, I mostly focused on the plasma cutter, and then I had the pulse rifle just to sort of deal with things at length. I did use the line gun, and I bought the one, I forget what it's called now, but there's one that basically it's a rail gun, and it shoots a long spike that can basically peg people to the walls.
Do you even have to kill them at that point once they're...
Yeah, eventually they'll like work themselves free.
Boo.
Yeah.
That's less fun.
Once if I find the name, I'll say it. But.
There's some other guns, like the Force Cannon, that the first time I played through this game I used. It basically is a gigantic explosive or a gigantic energy blast that I would just like upgrade the damage on and only ever use it on bosses. And that thing would take bosses down real quick. But you can only carry 4 weapons at a time. And so you really don't want to pick up guns that are that specialized that often.
No, because you're not going to, there are There are a few mini bosses, but all told, there are only about 3 full bosses, and one of them you don't even use guns for anyway.
Yeah, and I think in this game, because of the inventory system, until you really upgrade your suit a few times, and they dole out the suit upgrades on a regular schedule, so you start with a level 1 suit, and it's got a certain number of slots. Your level 2 suit will have a few more inventory slots. Level 3 will have even more. Until you get the later level suits, you can't hold more than maybe 1 or 2 reloads worth of ammo for any given gun if you're going to diversify.
No.
And so it really just hamstrings you, especially if you're going to pick a gun like the plasma rifle that just eats ammo. I found that with the plasma rifle, I just kept finding line racks, and I couldn't use them because I barely use the line gun because it's just so strong. I don't need it for average combat. And it basically forced me... It would cause me to run out of ammo on my more frequent guns. And so it kind of forced me to diversify and differentiate. You know, just use other guns because I ran out of ammo for the ones that I wanted to use.
Right.
But I think that that's a bit of an odd play pattern.
Sure.
Like there are certain guns that are definitely trump cards for given situations. Like the line gun is really for crowd control and for dealing with large groups of enemies, and that opportunity doesn't present itself all the time. And so I want it, and I want it to have ammo. But if I am just picking up ammo as I find it, it's very likely that I'll pick up a lot of line racks and then not be able to get rid of them. So I would actually sell ammo pretty frequently.
It's especially strange, too, when we go back to saying how the solution for this is really, all right, I'll just stop carrying the line gun then so I can get ammo for the other ones.
Yeah, it's kind of an odd design choice. Mm-hmm. Speaking of design, what did you think of the mission design in this game?
As in, like, how they're divided and how you get from place to place and such?
Yeah, so traveling throughout the ship via tram. Each level is kind of its own discrete section of the ship. And you're basically, the level will start with one of the people who speaks in your ear saying, "We need this thing."
Yeah. I got super sick of the tram. But also, like, I never really felt like I had an understanding of the geography of the overall ship. Like, you have these sort of individual sections, like, all right, I'm going to med bay now, or I'm going to hydroponics. But, like, if the ship itself is supposed to be an environment, I'd like to understand, okay, how do all these things connect? Beyond just like, oh, I guess I'll get on the tram and it'll take me where I need to be.
Yeah, it basically turns the ship into just a bunch of discrete levels
connected
by a tram. And I thought each of these areas had their own personality, but like you said, the greater whole of the Ishimura is not really that much of a character.
No, you never know anything about it, really.
No. I mean, you do find out a little bit about its crew, and there are some crew members that will recur in audio logs and text logs. But other than that, it's just a horror ship.
Mm-hmm.
It's Event Horizon, but less good.
I like Event Horizon. It's a good movie.
So, what did you think? Do you think this is a horror game?
Nah, it's trying to be. I guess I would say that. Like, it's doing some horror-ish things, but it's not like, you know what I think it is? I think it's leaning towards into the gore and saying like, ooh, look at how these dismembered corpses have come alive. Isn't that terrifying? And if you're just like, kind of at first, it has diminishing returns as it goes.
Yeah, because that's kind of where I come at it. I think that this is an action game. It just happens to be that the enemies you're fighting are extra gross. But I don't see this game being that different from the flood levels of Halo.
No. Or like it's like Dune, like, but just not Dune. Doom, but ramped up in the creepy, gross enemy factor, like you said.
Yeah, like they flicker the lights occasionally. Like some of the light flickering is pretty much the only times I was scared in this game.
You make it sound like it's just like some guy at the switch is like, ooh, flipping it on.
I mean, it basically is. Like, you'll walk into a room and it's like, oh, all these lights are on and this is a long hallway. Wonder if they'll turn off when I walk down them. And then the lights go off and ooh, and then you hear like a clink. Oh, is there an enemy? And then the lights come back on. There's a couple of sections where it's just like quarantine begins, and then it locks the doors, and enemies will come at you in waves. And you can always tell that that's about to happen because they give you an empty room full of ammo.
It's pretty clear.
But, other than the enemies being gross to look at and making kind of creepy noises, I don't find that this game really got at any deeper fears for me, despite it being a zombie game and kind of getting to play with all of the fears that zombie narratives traditionally get to play with. Like, they bring up the fear of being infected, right? Like, all these characters that are trapped on the ship start talking about how first they start hallucinating and seeing people that they know who were dead, and then these characters that are trapped on the Ishimura, before you get there, they'll leave logs about people who have been down on the colonies, so down on the surface of this planet they're cracking, kind of going mad and killing each other, but then just snapping back to normal and going about their lives as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't killed someone. Then there's some characters who, their madness starts consuming them. You see that some characters get exposed to this virus that grows very quickly and consumes flesh, and it's a habitat transformer, or what do they call it?
Ecosystem transformer, I think.
Whatever. It's a biosphere manipulator.
They throw a whole bunch of shit at the wall.
Yeah, it's a creature, like these creatures change the habitat to adapt to better suit them. So you run into some people who have been turned into basically sources of toxin, like they make toxic gas because this, whatever the weird, gross stuff is, grows better in toxic gas. But they don't really delve into the fear of being infected in your character or really many of the characters you encounter. Like for your team, it's all about occasionally seeing something spooky, but you don't see it necessarily. You see Nicole occasionally, but even that's not especially creepy.
No. And their solution really, and once we get to the story, is just to keep adding more stuff, and especially just more gibberish.
Yeah, so why don't we get to that?
Sure. Well, before we do, I just want to say one more thing about the gameplay I don't think we've mentioned is they dig a really big deal. I think I remember this, especially from the promotion materials, of there being no HUD.
Yes.
Like everything's just in his suit. So like his health bar is basically like some lights down his spine, and like the ammo doesn't like show up exterior to the character itself. And like that's cool. That's fine. But I remember them making a way bigger deal about how immersed you'd feel without that sort of heads-up navigation.
Yeah, I would say that it definitely made this game stand out at the time, and it does have payoffs sometimes, but I think all the payoffs of not being in the HUD are basically when you're in a menu or in a shop or something, and you get attacked from something that you couldn't have seen because you were in a menu.
Yeah.
But that's, I think, all that matters is occasionally you will get attacked when you're in a menu.
Okay.
That and the most clever thing, I think, is the waypoint system. If you tap in on one of the analog sticks, Isaac will kind of put out a beam, and it'll show you a line straight to where you need to go. I think that was probably one of the biggest innovations of this game, doing that without a map.
Okay. Story, then. My God, the story. Okay, let's try our best. So, turns out this mission wasn't really what you thought it was at all.
Oh, shit.
I know. Who knew? So basically, there's this thing called the red marker that I'm going to try my best here. Like, understand, I'm working here. The red marker was a rebuild of the black marker, which we won't have to get that far into. But it was suppressing the necromorphs on Aegis, the planet they're cracking. So people went down, they took the marker off that planet, which one, let the necromorphs come to life, and two, started driving all the people on the ship insane. Yep. So eventually the necromorphs got on the ship, they killed everybody, so they sent Isaac and his team in to go pick up the red marker, basically. And the whole time, Kendra, oh no, turns out, was evil!
No!
I know! She was working to get the marker back and take it away from the planet, even though it needed to be on the planet to stop the necromorphs. And not just that, Nicole was dead the whole time!
What?
I know! You were hallucinating her from the very beginning.
Do you mean to tell me that Hammond, the character that Kendra tells you not to trust, is the good guy, and the character who's trying to gain your trust is the bad guy?
I know.
What?
I know. The innovation in this storytelling is incredible.
But you see, Pete, it's all really about the Unitarian Church.
Yes. Yes, it is. All this other stuff was just side plot.
Because the Unitarian Church believes that human transcendence is the future, and by transcendence they mean being turned into a giant hunk of organic matter, just one giant hunk of goo that is the necromorphs.
Yes.
And they're a death cult, basically.
Yeah, pretty much.
And this, it turns out this ship, the Ishimura, is, I guess, either funded by or has been co-opted by Unitarians.
Yeah, apparently the Unitarians have taken over most of the remaining world government or something.
Yeah. They're a death cult that wants to bring these markers to cause humanity to be exposed to the necromorphs. Yes. And there's basically two different Unitarian sects, kind of, on the ship. Mm-hmm. There's one that's driven by Chalice Mercer, who's a doctor.
Totally nuts.
Yeah, and he mostly experiments using the bacteria or biomass that is the necromorphs.
Yes.
So he experiments on people by injecting the cells into living people instead of letting their dead tissue come back to life. So he makes kind of super necromorphs, and you have to fight one that just can't die.
Yeah, it regenerates itself.
It regenerates infinitely until you freeze it. And then there's another sect. I don't. Some other dude.
So the red marker.
Who wants the marker?
It's covered in inscriptions that
Yep.
like the Unitarian Church is trying to decode, and this guy like works with the marker and like the inscriptions and all this stuff.
Yeah, and that is his deal. So there's one person who's really fascinated by the zombies, one who's really fascinated by the marker that drives people mad and makes zombies also. But what did you think of the make us whole stuff?
My God, like the whole story, they just picked as many beats as they possibly could. They were like, don't trust this person. Turns out it was a hallucination the whole time. Like they were just throwing things at the wall. Like this is where I'm saying the BioShock influence came in. They were like, if one twist is good, 4 twists must be even better.
But what if we have half of the atmosphere and 1/4 of the world building,
Yeah,
but twice the shooting?
right.
Yeah. It's
I
pretty
think
good.
I think you're right. It is an action game. So I was intrigued by some aspects of the Church of Unitology in the deep abstract. I don't want to get into their theology very much, but like the idea of transcendence interests me as it related to a specific scientific concept. So I'm going to use a word now. The word is cephalization.
So we're all going to turn into octopi?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, kind of. Why do they call them cephalopods? I wonder. Well, cephalization regardless, right? So this is just the idea that as organisms basically become more complex, like smarter, right? They have more brain mass. They basically grow a head, right? They concentrate their important sense organs, nervous control at one end of the body, creating a head and brain, right? So ostensibly, you would think the necromorphs are less advanced, right?
I guess.
Yeah, because their heads don't matter.
Because when they form up like Voltron, no one's the head.
That is true. I mean, the brutes just have like a whole bunch of corpses molded together.
It's actually funny. If you shoot the heads off of a necromorph, it will just swing its talons wildly at you because it can't see anymore. So they actually become more dangerous. They are just constantly attacking.
Yeah, they're just basically a whirring buzzsaw, just hacking sides and limbs.
Yep.
But the interesting thing, right, is this sort of cephalization argument, which I just invented anyway, takes an interesting twist when you think about the hive mind. So it's basically that there's this one hive mind that's on the planet that controls all of the necromorphs. So their brain function is basically subletted. That's the word I want. Whatever. Their brain function is shunted off to this other hive mind, which I think you could argue is even greater cephalization.
Yeah.
So it goes from having like a head on a body to having all these bodies have a single head. So I think in the way the Unitarian's a real religion. The Unitology argument makes sense viewed from the perspective that like, yeah, maybe the hive mind and its sort of necromorph appendages are a more advanced, transcendent version of humanity. But then you run into this other argument that like, well, evolution doesn't really admit of more advanced or less advanced. It's just more or less suited to the environment. And then it sort of falls apart anyway.
Yeah, and if your argument is we should like, there is no future where humanity is still recognizable as humanity and allies itself with the necromorphs.
Yeah.
The
It's an all or
necromorphs
nothing
just
deal.
feed.
Yeah.
You are not part of it. You are just a host.
It seems like the main issue here is sort of like the humans have opted out of the food chain, which like I'm happy about. I don't want to be part of the food chain. But like we kill tigers that eat people. or like I don't know, sharks. If we go back to Jaws, that ate people. So this is basically a case of like the necromorphs being like, no, you're part of the food chain again, and all the humans are like, we don't like that.
We don't like it one bit.
Yeah, no, this is no good for us.
And then there's the hallucinations and madness that
Well,
comes from
yeah.
the marker for no real, inexplicably.
Which, yeah, the marker, I forgot to mention, the marker is also sentient. It has
Yeah.
a subconscious that's directing. It's the thing sending Isaac these visions of Nicole to try to trick him into bringing the marker back to the planet.
But that's where it needs to be to stop the necromorphs, right?
Yeah, well, it needs to be in a specific location to stop the necromorphs. But I think if it's not in that spot, it enhances them somehow.
It's really upset. It wants to be made whole.
Yeah, it's all whatever's going on. The red marker is controlling Isaac.
Yes, and continues to in Dead Space 2. Yeah, I gotta say, I've played Dead Space 1 and 2, and I realized that I played 1 and 2 because as I was playing 1, I kept waiting for story beats and being like, wait, did I play 2 also? Is that why I'm remembering story beats that aren't happening? Because these games are so damn similar.
There's 3 too, right?
I've never played the third game because apparently the third game is bad.
Yeah, like I mean, I have my complaints, but Dead Space is at least entertaining, and it's why. But the story is, it's gibberish, and like I said, it's like if you think BioShock and Halo on like a continuum, Dead Space basically smashes them both together, and like proper nouns, chaos, the flood, and just tries to throw a whole bunch of stuff together.
I will say at least this game has the decency to have less story than Halo.
True.
And you can opt out of a lot
novels?
of it. I do not know, but I know that in this game there's only a few times where you get locked in a room and have to watch someone monologue at you. And that's
there are many novels.
Dead Space novels?
There are at least 6.
Fuck. What's in them? And then they saw the necromorph.
I have no idea. They all have terrible names too. There's Dead Space : Martyr, Dead Space : Liberation, Catalyst, Salvage.
Were these written by the same person or a different person each one?
My guess would be different, but I can't tell.
Great. Man, and then he shot the leg off.
Right? Like,
and it crawled. And then he shot the tentacle off. And then it could crawl no longer. Sign me up.
Mm-hmm.
That was a pretty good sentence.
You're into. They stopped publishing them in 2013, but I guess you can. I bet if you asked, they'd keep putting them out.
Let's bring this Dead Space thing back. This time, you go back to the beginning. Eh?
Yeah, pretty good, right?
Oh man, it's fine. Like the boss fights in this game, I think are fine. For the most part, they're nice changes of pace. The zero gravity sections I found to be pretty fun.
Mm-hmm.
Just thinking about the world in that different way. I think that there are just a few too many combat doodads you can do, like with stasis and the weapons. And there's also kinesis. You can you've got
basically telekinesis.
Yeah, Half-Life 2 telekinesis or gravity gun sort of stuff. Except you can't throw stuff, which is annoying.
It didn't seem like, I'm surprised too that, so maybe this is an artifact of it being 2008 was when it released, but it seems if you're going to like make the impetus of your game, that basically Earth's resources have been depleted and we're now cracking open other planets and just siphoning them dry. There's not really any environmental message going on. Like you could have done like the necromorphs or a plague that like the planet uses to protect itself or something, but I never picked up on any environmentalism here.
Yeah, there's not really an environmentalist message. There's not much. Like the zombie mortality questions aren't really asked either.
Yeah, are the necromorphs alive or dead? Are they human anymore?
Are the people who are affected by the necromorphs alive or dead? Do they have any sort of consciousness? People talk about there being horror as they are kind of losing their minds and seeing things that aren't there. Mm-hmm. But all of the characters you meet are either like sawing other people and not talking to you or killing themselves.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, if all of your human-looking character models are just committing violence on themselves and others, you're not asking questions.
No. And I
You
mean,
know?
this gets back to the food chain point, right? Like whether necromorphs have a right to eat us, I guess, if they are sort of vaguely human still.
But they barely even ask that. Like,
Yeah,
the
never.
characters who espouse that sort of view are so cartoonish and over the top. And they, like, at one point, Mercer just says, like, you must see what the hive mind has to offer. And then you see, like, you go to the hydroponics section and you run into the Leviathan, which is a big necromorph that is in the cargo hold. And it's just this big tentacle monster. Like, there's nothing especially interesting to it. You don't really talk to the hive mind. You don't get an understanding of what the consciousness of this thing is. So I just feel like they've invoked a bunch of concepts that can be used to tell a interesting story and, you know, delve into some deeper questions, and they just decide to ignore all of that and focus on shooting things arms off, which, I mean, it got them 3 games.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun in its way. I think the problem returns to this sort of grossness factor, where like they ramped the gross up so far. And I mean, for whatever reason, I think as things get grosser, we tend to impute less, call it consciousness, agency, humanity to them, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't want to, I could make some arguments, you know, from the past and things, you know, how we treated certain classes of people. I don't want to do that because that's, you know, a whole other thing, and that it's, you know, wrong and unfortunate in a whole bunch of different ways. But at least in the necromancer case, we can see like, oh, these things are very, very gross. Kill them now.
Yeah, and I think that it's worth mentioning around this time was the Saw movies were quite popular.
Yeah.
Those torture porn styles of movies were coming out at the time.
Pornography, if you will.
Yeah. And having this kind of gross, over-the-top violence and dismemberment, I think might have played into that zeitgeist a little bit.
Yeah, what a horrible moment that was for movies and media generally. Do you think, so Human Centipede came out in 2009. I would say that was really the moment that maybe ended that as a thing.
I think that was probably the apex of that. Here's just a gross concept, and we're just going to show you gross stuff.
Both the apex and the nadir, if you will.
Yes. Much like the Human Centipede, it is both. It is a head attached to an ass. So, man, this game, I think it's...
I'm sorry to interrupt just because we were talking. Did you know that there were multiple Saw video games?
Yes, I did.
What?
I've seen some of it. I haven't played it, but I saw one where one of the main, like, interactions you can do is dunking your hand into a toilet full of syringes in order to find objects.
The Wikipedia says Saw received mixed reviews.
Yo, word?
It's got a 59 out of 100 on Metacritic.
Weird. I can't believe that wasn't a banger. Those well-produced movies, I can't believe they didn't have great video games with them.
I know, I can't believe it.
But I think that it's kind of emblematic that Saw movies like these, like Dead Space, it is mostly about the gore and just people inflicting pain on themselves and the questions that are being asked by the film, not really that deep.
No, they're ancillary at most.
Yeah. So, I think that's Dead Space. Do you have any last thoughts?
No, I think, you know, at most I'd probably say Dead Space is fine. Like, if you just want action, it's serviceable, and it has a very interesting mechanic that'll carry you for a little while. If you want horror or deeper questions about, let's say, humanity's place, you're not going to find it here.
Yeah, if you want a game that's going to be an action game that will occasionally scream at you and flicker the lights on and off, it's got you covered.
This is it. This is the one.
One interesting thing I noticed, just from a technical perspective, as someone who codes, it was interesting to see how they managed to do the walls undulating. Some of them, like, when they have large sections where organic stuff is growing on the walls, there are some sections where they're actually using a model to represent kind of the organic growth. But sometimes it's just a texture. And in the cases where it's a texture, they still manage to kind of make it look like it's wriggling by basically applying a blur effect on the texture for a few seconds and then unblurring it.
Oh, okay.
And I thought that was a really clever way. Whoever did that,
good work.
Whoever worked on Dead Space and said, hey, I'm going to do this, because applying a blur to an image is pretty resource light. If you wanted to change the image or wriggle it, like actually do something that made it look like it moved, that would actually be decently resource intensive, at least in comparison. So they managed to achieve the effect of movement while using very few resources. So way to go. Great work. I see you, whoever did that. Way to go.
And then they could devote that extra time to increasingly realistic wall blood.
Yes, increasingly realistic wall blood to more accurate tentacle movement. They could have more tentacles on screen, thanks to him or her.
I haven't seen this many tentacles since hentai.
Well, I don't know if we're going to get that many in Ocarina of Time.
Unfortunately.
We can only hope. Well, thank you, Pete. And reminder, if you want to send in any emails to Billy's Farewell Show or anything on Ocarina of Time or Dead Space, please do so at DeepListensPod on Twitter, deeplistens.libsyn.com. We've got comment sections, and deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com. That's our email. So thank you, Pete.
Thank you. Just to answer, call back to the earlier part of the episode, cephalopods just mean head feet. So cephalization is just making a head, basically.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, pod, right, foot.
Yep. I should have known that too. But hey, we got it now.
Well, I didn't take Latin, so I've just, at this point, it's just by existing in the world.
I think that's Greek, actually.
Whatever. Same thing.
Pretty much.
All right. Till next time, listeners. Peace.